And welcome to Rob Schmitt Tonight. This week we're analyzing the assault being leveled against your kids in our rapidly devolving country. Radical leftists have spent generations infiltrating every meaningful institution in this nation. It was only a matter of time until they showed up at your kids' school and in other places as well. And in just the last few years, a full-blown system designed to indoctrinate America's youth, hoping to breed a new generation that will destroy the America that you know and create a new country untethered to the burdens of capitalism and all the freedoms that annoy our bloated government, a government that has grown like a tumor and only wants to grow larger and more powerful. The New York Times introduction of the 1619 Project has played a pivotal role in this left-wing mission, presenting an explanation for why black Americans in a nation bending over backwards to help them are still so far behind, blaming systemic racism that has lingered for hundreds of years, they say. Ironically, systemic racism has nothing to do with this problem. 60 years of liberal policies are fully to blame. The 1619 Project simply provides cover for a political ideology that spent decades manipulating black Americans for their votes. Lyndon Johnson was a spectacular racist whose war on poverty programs in the 1960s did tremendous damage to the African American spirit. Johnson famously claimed that his welfare programs would have these N-words voting Democrat for 200 years. It ended up being true. And it also devastated the community that Johnson simply wanted to secure as a voting bloc, it would seem. Jerome Hudson from Project 21 put it this way: Lyndon Johnson's war on poverty produced a reality that is horrifyingly different from the one he probably hoped for. Instead of providing a mere safety net for families in need, it effectively replaced the virtues of work and self-reliance with an avalanche of welfare programs nurturing the poor. These welfare programs foster defeatism, disincentivize two-parent homes, and set ablaze an American underclass now seemingly trapped in a never-ending cycle of poverty. You want the real explanation for what's going on in this country? That was it. The white liberals in control of the American left, though, will never admit what they've done to black Americans. The liability, of course, is far too great. It's much easier to launch a full-blown assault of white guilt on the American public, which now, as we're seeing, begins in grade school, with white kids being taught they're oppressors and black kids being trained as victims, being trained to just give up, being told they never had a chance anyway. Naturally, this has parents fuming, parents of all colors, like this father in Wake County, North Carolina.
This past year, we spent $1 million on a diversity office. And how did that benefit black children? How did it benefit children in general? Well, 78% of 3rd through 8th grade black students are not proficient in math in Wake County. We're wasting taxpayer dollars putting money towards this diversity office that's not benefiting those who need it the most.
Wasting $1 million on an office that's not benefiting those who need it the most. That's because none of what we're seeing is designed to actually benefit the black community. It's designed to remind them that they're victims. It's designed to keep the politics in check. It's designed to keep black Americans dependent, because then, just like LBJ dreamed, you can control their vote. But don't you dare question LBJ, even though he was an overt racist. He's a hero to the American left. MSNBC puts it best in a soft-soaked op-ed from 2014. You can be as racist as you want, as long as you're pushing for perpetual welfare and dependency for low-income Americans. It's fine. Joe Biden gets the same pass. This country has been led down a very dark road. America, of course, is long past its prime at this point, corrupted and taken over by a cadre of ideologists who want to radically change everything that America is. No longer will it be a God-fearing nation built on freedom, personal responsibility, self-sufficiency. In order to control Americans, which is what they really want to do, all of those fundamental American ideas must be destroyed. And your kids have been flung into this war. And if you're angry about that, they just call you a racist. And if you're angry about that and you're black, you're a traitor. You're a traitor to your race. And even with so much at risk, there is an army fighting back. From the Washington Post, according to Ballotpedia, there were 91 recall attempts lodged against 235 school board members nationwide in 2001, a huge spike from the average of about 30 every year since 2009. Nowhere are schools more screwed up than in our darkest blue places, darkest blue cities in the country, darkest blue states, where reality, it seems, no longer exists. In New York, anti-racism is everywhere. In public schools, merit is dead. Asian American students are now vilified for being smarter than everybody else. And the insanity has spilled over into private schools as well, like Grace Church School in Manhattan, where teacher Paul Rossi was effectively fired after his comments during a segregated all-white student and faculty Zoom meeting. Because remember, segregation in 2022 is now a good thing. Paul Rossi joins me now to explain exactly what happened to him. And sir, it's good to have you on tonight. Tell us, you're on this Zoom call. It's an all-white Zoom call, which apparently is okay these days because it's racist for the right reasons. What exactly happened here?
Well, the particular Zoom meeting was billed as it was during the pandemic, and it was billed as a self-care meeting, so that the students who have had trouble, they haven't seen friends in 2021, they've been having trouble focusing on their studies at home, that they would have a way to, work on their internal dialogue and basically function better. But it was really a bait and switch. And what happened in the meeting that I was in was the facilitator put up materials essentially labeling them as privileged, labeling them as oppressors, saying that they were perpetuating white supremacy culture through various sins, including and not limited to things like worship of the written word, things like perfectionism, punctuality, objectivity, things like individualism. Wow. Things that really are, in most cases, virtues that are the birthright of all Americans, were being demonized. And I watched one after another as all of these children who had been through many of these sessions before, these were not unusual, essentially repeating the party line that they would try to do better, that they knew they had privilege. And they were essentially being shamed in front of their teachers, because this was a meeting with their teachers as well as other students. Right. And I felt that I needed to say something about it then. And because I realized that the students had never actually seen a teacher at the school. I had been teaching there for 10 years, openly challenge these ideas and try to get them exposure to a different point of view. So I asked the facilitators some pointed questions about, what was the basis for all of these assertions, all of these beliefs that were being presented as knowledge, which they're not. And, I was really gratified because it kicked off a conversation. It was a very positive conversation. Many of the kids felt that, it brought a lot more, that opened their minds to different points of view. I received some pushback in the meeting, but many of the other students and even some colleagues of mine, spoke out and said, look, I don't think that these issues, that we should be racializing these issues. I think that, the pandemic is affecting everyone. Yeah. And so
was that all it took for I mean, you weren't fired then on the spot, right? But that was about all it took to get pushed out of the school?
Yeah, essentially, I was told that I had caused grievous harm to the students of color who were not in the meeting, but heard that not all of the white faculty were on board with anti-racism as an ideology. Good God. And I also said some things in support of capitalism, which has raised the standard of living for people around the globe more than any other system. Yep. I also actually questioned the idea of racial identity itself, myself as a white person, the idea that if race is a social construct, well, then why do we have to reify race as something important for children? How are we ever supposed to get past it? And this was seen as not even a microaggression, but an aggression.
An aggression, yeah. I try to analyze exactly what's happening to people that go all in on this narrative. I do think that there's people that I think that they are struggling for an explanation to a problem that we can all see. I think that if you're liberal, you refuse to believe that it has anything to do with the failures I think, most Democrat control in this country over the last 50 years. And I think that, rather than say, oh, we've created programs that have become like a narcotic to people, where we've just killed their spirit, we've killed their ability to go out and try and be independent and carve their own path. We've just put them on the dole perpetually for decades now. They don't want to admit to that. So this is the other option, right? They have to believe in this.
Yeah, and it's important to really identify the strands and where these ideas are coming from.
Yeah.
A lot of them are just reinvented, warmed over Marxism that's playing out in the realm of identity politics rather than economic class. But economic class is a big part of it too as well. So, it is interesting to me that it's not that all my colleagues or administrators at the school were not patriotic. They just had a very different idea of the story of America. Right. And, to them, instead of America being a story about liberty and about the natural rights of citizens and how those should be protected, they had a different idea about the history of America being one of inclusion and about extending different sets of rights and expanding rights for which the state was responsible. So, for example, things like freedom, instead of liberty, they talk about freedom from want, freedom from inequality, and various things that really aren't natural rights. So it really is a completely different perspective, which is taken as gospel.
Yeah, I understand that. My last question to you is, as somebody that's obviously analyzed this thing and has been through it the way you have, how do you kill this cancer? Because I think that's what most people that want to fight back against this want to know. How do we? They call it, the woke mind virus, whatever you want to call it. This is a cancerous ideology in our society. How do we kill it?
We need viable, real, different market alternatives for parents, because it's infected not just the public schools, but the private schools and the elite private schools in particular. So, if I was, and I do counsel many parents, and what I tell them is, look for a smaller school. Perhaps if you're not religious, you should consider some of the smaller religious schools that aren't corrupted by this already, because so many of the feeder schools for the top colleges, the Ivies and things like that, run by an association called the National Association for Independent Schools. Right. Those schools are almost at this point a lost cause. And it's very sad, because these are great institutions historically, places that we've seen places like Project Veritas exposed, like Trinity in Manhattan and the Francis Parker School in Chicago. These are really damaged places right now. So I would steer clear of them. I think your child's going to have a better experience, and they're going to have a better education in terms of their skills, and not be exposed to this stuff.
Yeah. We need to get some way. We got to get a voucher program so that people don't have to be forced to pay for these. In the public school cases, there's so many bad public schools at this point. I can't imagine paying for that and having no option, like a lot of people don't. Paul, thank you so much for taking the time. It's been eye-opening. We appreciate your story.
Thank you, Rob. Appreciate it.